This meeting of Orangeville Town Council to order for Monday, November 15th. Could we have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Peters, second by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Could we have the singing of our national anthem, please?
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Many thanks to David Nair, the Artistic Director of Theatre Orangeville, for that rendition of our national anthem. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and the Odawa of Three Fires Confederacy. This meeting is being aired on public television and/or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. Tonight, we're going to have a statutory public meeting, and I want to outline some of the procedures. Anyone who would like to speak to this matter may call into 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID 375-361-417 #. Callers will be invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of the meeting presentation. We'd also like to ask anyone who would like to be notified of further consideration of this topic to submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to ckhan, that's CKHAN, @orangeville.ca. Note that any information collected is a matter of public record. So this public meeting is specifically to talk about an election sign bylaw amendment. And we have with us tonight our Deputy Clerk, Carolina Kahn, who's going to provide a presentation for council and the public. Ms. Kahn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the members of council, thank you for having me tonight to present to you with respect to the election signs bylaw, specifically on the proposed amendments. So I'm just going to share my screen, and if I could just get a thumbs up from the members just to let me know that you can see the screen properly.
Yes, thank you.
Good, good. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we'll move right along. So council approved the regulatory bylaw review work plan in 2019, and in that work plan, they identified the election sign bylaw to be reviewed and updated in 2021. So that is exactly what we're doing, and as such, council at its meeting on October 18th, 2021, received report CPS 2021-073, election sign bylaw update, and decided that a public meeting be held on November 15th, tonight, to receive feedback and comments on the proposed election sign bylaw. Following this public meeting, staff will be reporting back to council at the January 10th council meeting with a compiled list of comments and feedback with respect to the election sign bylaw. So as outlined in the report, and just by way of background, the town's current election sign bylaw was adopted in 2013 and has not since been amended. The proposed updates seek to provide residents, candidates, and third-party advertisers with information that is clear and easy to understand. By doing so, we're expecting that compliance would improve. And in addition, we see that the proposed framework, we see it as being proportionate to the existing resources available for enforcement. So I'll just give a brief overview of the proposed updates. This is a summary of what was contained in the report. But essentially the definitions were updated. They went from 11 definitions, or they would be going from 11 definitions to 21 definitions. Signs would continue to be allowed to be erected in any zone. Sign dimensions on all permitted properties would be 1.5 square meters in sign area and 2 meters in height. So there is no distinction between the size on public property versus private property. It would be consistent. Whereas the existing bylaw did not establish any rules around display type, the proposed bylaw prohibits the use of the town logo, crest, seal, or public property, animation containing video display elements or illumination. Whereas the existing bylaw does not establish any rules around the placement date, the proposed bylaw sets out that signs cannot be erected earlier than nomination day. So for the municipal election, that would be August 19th, 2022, in this upcoming municipal election, or prior to the issuance of the writ for a provincial or federal election. The proposed election sign bylaw carries through that no signs are allowed on a highway that interferes with the sightlines and safe movement or visibility of vehicular traffic, cyclists, or pedestrians. It would also prohibit a sign without the consent of the property owner or on public property. However, the proposed amendments further establish that signs are prohibited on a roadway. This would include medians and areas used for vehicular traffic, on any official sign, so that would be traffic signs, government regulated signs, on a tree, or at a voting place. The existing bylaw does not have provisions established with respect to the removal and storage of signs. The proposed bylaw thus outlines that signs are to be removed within 3 days after the day of an election. Officers may remove a sign without notice. The town will recover costs for the removal and storage of signs. Candidates may retrieve the signs free of charge within 3 business days of being notified by the town, and a fee of $25 per day would be charged thereafter. The town will store the signs for 60 days after their removal, and following that period, the signs will become the property of the town and may be destroyed at that point. The town may recover the costs payable for the removal and storage of election signs. The proposed bylaw further defines enforcement and penalties through the addition of clauses with respect to the powers of an officer in the enforcement of this bylaw. So this includes access to land or a lot or records, and as well as the inclusion of inspection powers. The penalty section outlines that every person who contravenes any provision of this bylaw or an order issued under this bylaw, and every director or officer of a corporation who knowingly concurs in the contravention by a corporation is guilty of an offense, and upon conviction is liable to A, on a first offense to a fine of not more than $50,000, and on a second offense and each subsequent offense to a fine of not more than $100,000. So that is a review of what has been proposed to date per the report presented to Council on October 18th. However, in consideration of the reports at that meeting, Council did request further information regarding the following. So firstly, prohibiting election signs on public property, but with a particular focus on boulevards and residential areas. The number of, also considerations around the number of signs per a designated area, as well as restricting the number of days that election signs may be erected for municipal elections. So in an effort to provide further clarity to Council, staff conducted a further review of rules of other municipalities pertaining to election signs. We looked at relevant legislation and other legal references. The next few slides are going to outline the additional considerations as discussed at the October 18th meeting, and we're also providing some options and further information with respect to our recommendations. So in particular, there are questions raised regarding the proliferation, always have a hard time with that word, of signs across the town. Though this slide references public property in the title, the focus is particularly on the erection of signs on boulevards, just given the conversation that was had at the October 18th meeting. So as you can see, this visual representation, option 1, is what was outlined in the report. It is the least restrictive option as it provides candidates and third-party advertisers with the most flexibility by allowing the erection of election signs on boulevards on any town-owned road. In an effort to address the questions and concerns raised by Council, staff are proposing option 2 as shown in this slide. Under this option, signs would only be allowed on town-owned arterial and collector class roads. This option, we believe, provides a balanced approach between keeping some public areas available, but also regulating excess erection of signs in all areas of the town. Further restrictions on the erection of signs beyond what is outlined in option 2 is not recommended by staff, as it would considerably impair a person's ability to erect election signs within the town. There were 2 additional considerations that were discussed by Council. So just before I get into the specific details with respect to those 2 items, I just wanted to make the point that in our research, we did look at the different provisions with respect to these items, and municipalities in Ontario, they do have the authority to regulate the erection of election signs within their respective boundaries. However, this authority is subject to constitutional limits. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms outlines that everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. Any limits placed on a person's fundamental freedoms must be reasonable and demonstrably justified. As I will be explaining, that has informed a lot of our recommendations in these 2 regards. Any restriction on the erection of election signs ought to ensure minimal impairment to a person wishing to exercise their freedom of expression. The recommendations provided in the report and outlined on this slide promote the safeguarding of these fundamental freedoms, keeping in mind that it is of utmost importance that candidates in any election be granted flexibility to express their political views, which undoubtedly includes the erection of election signs. So with respect to limiting the number of signs per a designated area, so staff's recommendation is that no limits be imposed on the number of signs that may be erected on any property for the following 3 reasons. Firstly, Any concerns with respect to an overabundance, if I could put it that way, of signs ought to be weighed against the need to grant candidates flexibility to express their political views and the need to safeguard the freedom of expressions for those who seek to support them. Secondly, to adopt such limits, a registration and permitting program may be required, whereby candidates and registered third parties would apply to the municipality for permission and pay a security deposit prior to erecting any signs. Such a program could disproportionately impact low-income persons, as it would reduce a person's ability to erect election signs. Thirdly, the clerk's division would require additional staff resources for the development and administration of a new registration and permitting program, for the handling of inquiries and complaints, and the bylaw enforcement activity that would follow. With respect to restricting the number of days, Ontario municipalities are generally consistent in timeframes defined for the placement of election signs when we're talking about provincial and federal elections, as the timeline aligns to the issuance of the writ in both cases. However, for municipal elections, the timeframes vary from municipality to municipality, and they go anywhere from 30 days to 60 days, approximately. Staff do not recommend any further changes to the time periods that were proposed in the report, and that's for municipal, provincial, and federal elections. For provincial and federal elections, this timeframe allows a candidate the opportunity to campaign for the entirety of the election campaign period. So it makes sense to allow them to do that. For municipal elections, however, the election campaign period of candidates may begin on the day which the clerk receives nomination papers. So just as an example, for the 2022 municipal elections, candidates will be able to file nomination papers as early as May 2nd, 2022. Those candidates who file earlier in the election campaign period are then required to campaign without the use of election signs for a prolonged period of time, which is an important part of campaigning. Staff, however, are not recommending that candidates be permitted to erect election signs as soon as they file their nomination papers. However, the staff recommendation seeks to propose a balance between restricting election signs and affording candidates as much flexibility as is reasonable to erect election signs during their campaign period. Therefore, the placement period, would be no earlier than nomination day as proposed. So for the following municipal election, that would be August 19th, 2022, and up to 3 days after the day of the election. So election day being October 24th. Whereas the current bylaw did not establish a placement date, by making nomination day the first permitted day for placement, staff see this as ensuring that all candidates get the same amount of time to erect their election signs, and thus creating an even playing field for all candidates. So some of the takeaways from this is the takeaways that I want to leave council with is that restrictions pertaining to election signs must be reasonable and justifiable relative to the charter. Should the entirety of the election sign bylaw become too restrictive from a freedom of expression perspective, it could be open to challenge as unreasonably restricting a person's ability to exercise their freedom of expression during an election. The proposed amendments, as we see it, strike a fair balance between the regulation of signs and allowing for flexibility with respect to freedom of expression. And with that, that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolina. Just wondering if you could go back to your option 1 and 2 as far as the streets, and could you just show that to us one more time, please? Absolutely. Let me just get to that screen one more time.
are you able to see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this would be option 1.
Right.
And that would be option 2.
So just to be clear, you're talking about signs to be mounted on the boulevard on these streets. If a property owner wishes to have the sign on their property inside the sidewalk, for instance, that would be permitted regardless of this particular part of the bylaw. Is that correct?
That's correct. They would be able to erect signs on their own property, absolutely.
Right. So if we went with option 2, that would restrict the placement of signs on boulevards completely, other than what's in front of us right now.
Right, so it would be the gray shaded roads.
Very good. Okay, that's my first question. I see Councillor Sherwood has her hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Ms. Khan, I was wanting to get an explanation of the color codes, what they represented, because I couldn't figure that out. So you're saying that option 2 would just be all of the gray lines?
Yes.
Is where signs could be?
That's correct, yeah.
Can you go back to option 1, please? So I was trying to look at the colors of the yellow and all that, and I couldn't figure it all out. I didn't realize we were looking at the gray.
That's just zoning categories, Councillor.
Okay, because I was trying to figure what's purple, what's green, okay. So here is currently what all elections up to this point has been on these lots, correct?
So option 1 is what was proposed in the report.
Which is the existing way?
Correct.
But now you said that was proposed in the report, but now you're proposing option 2?
Right, so through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Sherwood, that is correct, but this is based on following the discussion that Council had at the October 18th meeting with respect to an overabundance of signs, and particular with respect to the discussion on the placement of signs on boulevards in residential areas. So this is trying to strike a balance between the discussion that was had at that October 18th meeting, but also to allow for the erection of signs in other places in the town.
Okay, thank you.
And if I can interject here, I think this was a problem last election where some candidates decided to put signs on boulevards in front of homes that had been clearly identified as supporting another candidate. And that, I think if we went with option 2, that removes that. And I think, you know, if a resident wants this, a particular candidate sign on their lawn, then they should be allowed to have it. But this removes all of that boulevard stuff within the residential areas. And then again, my personal opinion would be option 2, but we're here as a group, so we'll see where that goes. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and Ms. Khan, thank you for the detailed report. Provides a lot of clarity, not only for members of council, but also for the general public. Also pleased that you were able to provide some clarity on the nomination date that you've indicated, especially for the general public who may not understand that nomenclature. Just back to the map itself and option number 2 and even option number 1. Would it be problematic to provide a listing of those particular arteries, the roads, or the permitted areas, regardless of what decision is made, just for the sake of providing some clarity for not only members of council but potential candidates as well?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Andrews, that's actually a great idea and something that we have already identified, if I could put it that way, just to provide a public reference for the public to be able to quickly identify where they can and cannot go. And yes, we would be very open to doing that, and would most likely be doing that, absolutely.
In the case of option number 2, it would make it a lot easier because again, we're not looking at a numerous number of locations in comparison to option number 1. But thank you for your response and maybe at least considering that as a possibility. Thank you.
Very good. I don't see anybody else with a hand up. I'll jump in with one more here. So just to be clear on the start date for signs, you had mentioned May 2nd as the date that nominations open. Is that correct, Carolina?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm just trying to find my page here.
That was indeed the date.
Yes, May 2nd, as early as
May
May 2nd.
2nd.
Yes, yeah.
But the recommendation is that we wait until the nomination period ends, which would be August 19th, and that would be the date that signage would be allowed to be put up. Is that?
That's correct. And Mr. Mayor, the reason for that is that May 2nd, we do recognize that would be a long time to have signs erected. So August 19th just provides like a clear marker, I guess, in the election timeline, and then it allows for every candidate to have the same amount of time because that is the last date that any nominations are able to be filed. So all candidates would need to be in by that date, and then every candidate would have the same amount of time.
Right, which will be about 65 days from my calculation here. Okay, Councillor Sherwood, and then Councillor Taylor.
Yes, Your Worship. Ms. Khan, on page 6 of 13 of your display here, under display type, you're making mention to propose animation, video, display elements, or illuminations. Is that? Oh, that's prohibited. Can we also include or consider types of flags and whirlywinds things, and like people that might put these great big flags out, similar to like outside a gas station, there might be someone with a great big peaky flag or blow up crazy guy or something. I'm just wondering, not that I'm thinking of having a blow up crazy guy or anything, but just to prohibit it from the future. And some people I've seen have the whirly spinny things. I think, shouldn't we just stay within stationary, non-movable items? Like, I don't know what the rest of my councillors feel about that, but
would that be considered animation? And if it is, it's prohibited.
So would a flag, like those big flag poles, like I see them at gas stations where it's great big. Like 8 feet, 10 feet tall.
There's a height restriction of 2 meters, which is in the previous page there. Right. And then animation, I would suggest any of that movement that your suggestion would be, covered under animation. Deputy Clerk, if you could confirm, is that the intent?
I'm talking about spinning around.
Yeah, that would be considered animation, I think. Again, Deputy Clerk, I'll let you speak to that.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So then what Councillor Sherwood is suggesting is covered. Is that correct?
Yes.
The prohibition of movement of those signs. Okay. Yeah. Very good. Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Andrews.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Khan, thank you very much for your report. I think it's excellent. Appreciate this very much. I think it's essential that we nip this before the next election for sure. I think the boulevards, it sounds like the majority of us are in alignment on that. So I'll be fine with option 1 or option 2, whatever is decided here. I certainly want those controls. And I guess for me, it's the timing piece. When we have an effective federal election, in my mind, they're 6 or 7 weeks long, and that's it, whatever the minimum time is. May 2nd through to October 24th is so long. I'm curious, do we need to be that long? Is there a way to have a truncated version? If it's mandated by the province or the feds and we can't get out of that, that's fine. But I wish it was shorter. Would be point 1, and then point 2. August 19th through to October 24th again is a long time. And I know citizens get tired of it. And if you're asking for support of a citizen to have a sign on the lawn for, 2 months, just over 2 months, it really is quite an imposition, I think. Anyway, if it's against, you mentioned kind of constitutional items. If it's against constitutional items, then I get that. But if it's something that we can do as a municipality, and I guess I'm asking for clarification, I'd still love it to be shorter. Like I think post Labor Day is lots. And at that point, people actually start to pay attention. Whereas in May, there's nobody paying attention to us. Although some of us are riveting people, they don't care about us running for re-election in May or June or July even. So anyway, that's my thoughts. I just wish we could be shorter.
Very good. Councillor Andrews again.
Yeah, thank you very much again.
Your worship, if I may, are you not going to allow Ms. Khan to answer the questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go. I thought you were making a comment there, not a question. Go ahead, Ms. Khan.
Can't we move them as on timings? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Taylor. With respect to the timelines around the campaign period, those are defined through the Municipal Elections Act. So that is provincial legislation and something that is beyond our jurisdiction in terms of amending. So those May 2nd is the date. Granted, yes, I do take your point of that being in a long election campaign period. Certainly, I understand that. I believe that the province did receive that feedback when the first day to file nominations used to be the first day in January, first business day in January. So yes, certainly, I think that it tried to be addressed by moving it to May, but yes, it is a lengthy period, absolutely. With respect to having the date from August 19th being nomination day up until election day, and then 3 days, removing them up to 3 days later, certainly it is council's discretion to pick the number of days that that council sees as being reasonable. However, as I explained, there are considerations to be made with respect to the freedom of expression as outlined in the charter, and the crux around that is that it is imperative that candidates be provided as much flexibility as possible. So the recommended August 19th is just sort of an even playing field for everyone, for every candidate, and so we see it as providing a good compromise between, not doing it from May 2nd all the way to October. It's somewhere a reasonable defined timeline in between. But certainly, to your point, Councillor Taylor, if council sees fit that is too long, that is something that you have that council would have discretion over in determining.
Thank you.
Councillor Andrews and then Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Khan, you referenced the Charter as somewhat of a guiding principle here for much of what has come about in your report. I'm wondering, under the freedom of expression, where does the utilization of signs and maybe on a vehicle? This does not necessarily apply, but do we have any jurisdiction on the size, when that would be actually, potentially placed on a vehicle? Because there are options certainly for a number of candidates, and depending on their resources, that may be something under consideration. So I'd like to just hear your response to that.
So certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Andrews. So certainly, the charter or the research that we've conducted and the determination that every restriction that is imposed must be balanced with the charter does provide us that guiding principle. In terms of having election signs on a vehicle, that would be allowed so long as it's not parked at a voting place or in a prohibited area. So we don't have or I could just say I don't have particular details of how that correlates necessarily to the principle of the charter, but so long as we are consistent in terms of providing candidates flexibility, but also that candidates are following the rules established in the bylaw in terms of making sure that they're not in prohibited areas, so on and so forth, then I think that would probably strike a balance.
Just for the sake of clarification, would the size be referenced in your report? You have, of course, the dimensions. Would that be replicated or enforced on any signs that could be placed on a vehicle during the defined period of time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't recall that detail right off the top of my head, but Councillor Andrews, I will take that back and confirm that detail.
Thank you, Ms. Khan.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I guess a couple of comments. First, I'm very much aligned with Councillor Taylor on keeping the duration of the signs to a reasonable amount. I'd like 45 days. I could live with 60. Nomination day is a clean break for sure, but it is still a lengthy period. And to Councillor Taylor's point, no one wants to think about an election over the summer. So from that regard, I think we're aligned. The other thing on option 1 versus 2, I definitely like option 2 better. I think restricting how much space these signs are gonna take up and occupy people's daily lives is important to address. But I think that's also a natural move toward limiting the number of signs. We're going from dozens and dozens of streets to perhaps 20 or less, and so the number of signs needed is less. And I don't think it's a stretch to say from there putting a cap on it, because again, space will be at a premium as we reduce those areas that are allowed. And I think you'll definitely see some jockeying there. If I look again, I'm going to talk about Blue Mountains, who implemented this last election. They are over 200 square kilometers in area. We're less than 20. They had 50 signs and they were stretched over a much larger area. I think 50 is still reasonable here. And obviously how it's administered could be discussed, but we spend tens of thousands on an election. And I don't think a little bit of sign permitting or whatever that mechanism is really going to cut into that a great deal. We haven't reviewed this bylaw for almost 10 years. It's probably going to be another 10. So I think we have to be thinking about several elections ahead and trying to get to a place where the signs are not such a level of sight pollution, and that that window of opportunity is level for everybody, but not unreasonable. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Sherwood.
Oh, yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to thank Councillor Peters for his comments. I would agree. I guess the big issue for me is as we think about the number of signs that are out there, I think we want to think back to what our lives were like, just over 3 years ago, and that is, other than Joe Andrews, who knows everyone in town, the rest of us were unknown commodities. And the way to have signs out, like signs drive name recognition, right? And although it'll be easier for all of us this time because we have name recognition, you're penalizing the people that are coming from behind and would be in the same spot we were in. So don't necessarily know the answer to that. Just want to be aware of it. And then the other point I wanted to mention was to run an election campaign, even in a small town. And I'm certain that the citizens wouldn't have a lot of sympathy for politicians as this goes on, but it's expensive. And I think about what the fine signs would, like the fines on signs would be if you really got hit and you weren't necessarily paying attention. And I can tell you, I've got other things to do and worry about versus where my signs are in storage at the town. Like I just did the math, you could be out $1,500 if you don't go pick up your signs for that period of time. So I don't know if that's right either. How I feel about that, but I think it's something that we should debate is those sign fines, and is that the right thing? But anyway, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Sherwood and then Councillor Post.
Yes, Your Worship. I just wanted to make a couple of comments with regards to statements made by my fellow councillors. I too think that we should look at a shorter time frame for having signage up. I'm looking at, say, like a 5-week pre-election day. I don't know why I'm stuck on 5 weeks, maybe because 5 is a lucky number. But I was kind of thinking that I think August to October is too long. As far as the number of signs, I can see where Councillor Peters is his thoughts are, and I can appreciate that. I can tell you, me as a candidate, I had 100 signs for both when I ran in 2014 and 2018. I ended up with about 71 remaining, and I felt that was adequate enough. So to go down to 50, I wouldn't really support 50, but I certainly felt that it was doable in my particular position with 100. I also worry about if we start with this sticker issue of putting them on, our bylaw enforcement officers are going to be just chasing around all around town, and people will take stickers off. Like that can be just a bit of an administrative nightmare. So I would just hope that candidates would be really respectful and not pollute our whole town. Like, I think if 17 candidates were running for different positions and everyone's allowed 100 signs, I mean, that's 1,700 signs. That is a lot. So that's where I kind of like the 50 idea, but I just don't know if 50 is quite enough. Because when you think of people that want it on their properties themselves, if you've already obligated them to outside streets, you may not have enough to comply to people that want them for their own personal properties. But anyhow, and as far as option, I like option 2.
Right, that's the arterial roads as being where boulevard signs can be placed, right?
Right,
yeah,
right. So I'm basically saying I like sort of a 5-week pre-election, 5 weeks before. Say if you wanted to put in a number of signs, I'd say 100, but I kind of go with the Charter of Rights that Ms. Connor alludes to, that everyone has, their own expression to display however they may like. So like I said, I just wouldn't be supporting a 50, and I also like the the fact of did I mention the 5 weeks before? I think I have. I'm repeating myself. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, Councillor Sure, we are capped financially, as you know. We're only allowed to spend so much money, so that is a restriction. And just for some further context, I just looked up on data Orangeville. There's 243 streets in Orangeville. So let that sink in. 50 signs doesn't do it for me. I agree that it was overload last year, last election. I was part of that overload. I had, I think, in the order of 600 signs out there, many of which got stolen, by the way, but yeah, somewhere between 500 and 600 signs were put out by my team last election. All right, we've got Councillor Post, and then Councillor Peters, and then Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments. First off, I would support option 2. I think that that's the right way to go to make sure that we are limiting the boulevards. So I would be definitely supportive of option 2. When it comes to a time limit, I support 35 days or even 45 days. Our neighbors in Caledon, the town of Caledon, have a 35-day limit on their sign length for all of their elections. And that seems to work extremely well for them. As for the number of signs, I'm struggling a little bit with this one because I do understand the need to restrict the number of signs, but a bylaw is only as good as what can be enforced, and it's putting a lot of strain on our bylaw to ask them to, like you said, Councillor Sherwood, to start looking for stickers and that kind of thing. So I don't know that I'd necessarily be supportive of limiting the number. If we're going to keep everything else in place, I think it may be a little difficult for our bylaw team, but those are just my kind of food for thought.
Thank you, Councillor Post. Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I should clarify, I wasn't suggesting a 50 sign cap in total. I was suggesting a 50 sign cap on public boulevards, which is those, dozen or so streets that we're looking at. So again, as you campaign and get to know people and they want to support you with a sign, obviously, by all means, that should be allowed. In terms of the bylaw enforcement work, I certainly think checking 20 streets versus 200 streets is already generous to staff, and I agree with that direction. So again, I was looking at the 50 as a cap only on those public rights of way, which again is where you get the most congestion.
Right. I think we also have to be aware that as incumbents, we have an advantage over the next group that is going to try and run against us. And because we've already established some supporters, we already have places we know we can put signs on property owners that are supporting us. So, by restricting things, I think it tilts things a little bit in our favor, and I think we have to be cognizant of that. I think we need to keep things open so that the next group of candidates that wish to run for election are given as much opportunity as possible, and that we don't use our incumbency as something over them in terms of limiting what another candidate can do or cannot do. So anyway, I just want to share that. Any other questions, Councillor? I got a couple more, but I'll ask around if there's anything else. I wanted to ask about the definition of signs, Ms. Khan, because, for instance, a bus shelter. A bus shelter measures 4 feet wide by over 5 feet tall. That is in excess of 1.5 square meters. A sign on a bus could be much larger than 1.5 square meters. A billboard is 10 foot by 20 foot. So I think there needs to be some clarity there, and I'm all for just limiting it to the lawn sign and maybe the 4x4 that many of us used as sort of a larger placement of signage. And I wonder if we need to be more specific on sign sizes and specifically types of signs. The reason I bring up billboards is because I sat in a meeting last week with some other GTA mayors, and the mayor of Burlington brought up the fact that some numbered companies, third-party advertisers, put up billboards in opposition to her last election, to the point where these numbered companies, she found out later, were all owned by the same person, and that in fact that person went over the spending limit significantly, but by that time the election was over. And in fact, it's being prosecuted right now here, 3 years later. So, billboards are a powerful tool that a moneyed politician could use. So, and this idea of third-party people supporting somebody clandestinely, I think needs to be addressed here. So, I'd like it to be quantified. I'd like it to be really well quantified. What size of sign can be used, and if the size is 1.5 square meters, that excludes billboards in my mind. So I don't know what the other councillors think about that, but they're out there. Bus shelters are out there. The bench backs. I use some of the bench backs. I think the bench backs actually fit under that category, because they're not that big. They're maybe 2 feet by 5 feet or 6 feet in size, but I don't know. That's just some of my feedback, and I know we've got a further kick at this come January, but I think we need to quantify the exact type of sign that can be used by candidates. All right, councillors, any other questions that we want to bounce off of Ms. Khan at this moment? And anybody listening in? Councillor Taylor, I just wanted to say, anybody else listening in or who's listening or watching this in the near future, Ms. Khan is receiving phone calls and emails. We're looking for public input on this as well. So all of the information is available on our website, but it's ckhan, C-K-H-A-N @orangeville.ca is our deputy clerk's email address to send in any notes and comments that you wish. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, sir. Thank you. There's our town is still a small town. So I think billboards and whatnot, yes, it could come, but the reality is we only had one billboard last time that I'm aware of, and it was on the west end of town, and it was owned by yourself, Mayor Brown, and no one else had a billboard. So I don't know. It's still a small town, and it's still local yokels like, you know, us 7 wannabes who wanted to serve our community. Like it's just a small town thing at this point, right? Like I don't know that we need to go so far in legislation, and I would hope there isn't. You know, hopefully, Mayor Brown, you don't have people that are going to put up billboards talking about you. It'd be the mayor's desk that would receive that type of treatment. It just doesn't feel like it's here yet. But I share your thoughts, but I would fall off my chair if that happened in Orangeville. And to be honest with you, I think everyone would know who that was and what that was, and I don't think that would go very well for the candidate or the people that were supporting that type of activity. You know, like our town doesn't seem to like that behavior, and I'm glad they don't. Like let's just have an election, and you know, may the best person win, male, female, black, white.
Yeah,
you know, just the best candidate with the best ideas, and that's it.
Right. Yep, 100%. But you know, Councillor Peters did make the comment that we need to look, you know, further down the road here. This is a 10-year review, and the town is growing. You know, the idea of signs on bus shelters or on buses is something that will be considered by candidates in the future. So.
I don't think we can put it on buses though, or town property at this point, right? Like I don't think the bus sign allows us to do that. So
the bus sign or the bus.
What to advertise on our town buses? I don't believe that as politicians we're allowed to do that. I think we're prohibited. Yeah, at this point. It doesn't say that in this, but if I recall back to the advertising policy for transportation, I don't think we're allowed to. Sorry, I interjected without.
Yeah, I think the benches were used last year. Last
election. It was well done.
I mean, but again, if we're going to have sign dimensions permitted and types of signs, then it should be, described and delineated properly and forcefully in the bylaw. That's my opinion. All right, Ms. Khan, you want to make comment?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to, I guess, tie up a couple of loose ends just from the comments that just have been said. Just through you to Councillor Andrews. Councillor Andrews, you were asking about vehicles. So section 3.5 of the proposed bylaw outlines that an election sign on a vehicle is not subject to the sign area and sign height restrictions of the bylaw. So that 1.5 square meter sign area, it wouldn't be restricted to that, and then the timelines would follow the same timelines as every other sign. So that's with respect to the size and the timing. Moreover, with respect to billboards, the proposed bylaw would not allow billboards, as the size restrictions would be as defined as that one size.
Right. Very good. All right, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, through your worship to Ms. Khan. Maybe something's not clicking in here because it could be a senior's moment, but if I go back to the sign dimensions again, you're saying a 1.5 meter square in sign area. So what does the 2 meters in height mean? That the sign can only go 2 meters up from the ground?
That's correct when you're considering the posts.
Oh, so it takes into from where it is in the ground to the top of the sign can't be higher than 2 meters.
Correct.
But the sign itself is still 1 by 5 squared. Got it. Right?
Very good. Thank you. All right, councillors, one last ask. Anybody have any further questions or comments? Very good. All right, Ms. Khan, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll move on now. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, it's
Yes.
Karen. If you could just ensure that there isn't anyone else on the line that wishes to ask any questions or provide any comments, I would appreciate it.
Very good. Mr. Bonato or Ms. Pormancherry, is there anybody on the line that wishes to comment or ask questions?
Through you, Your Worship, there's currently nobody else on the line.
Very good. Okay, thank you again for your presentation, Ms. Khan. Councillor Sherwood.
Do we have to formally receive this, or did somebody already do that?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Mhm.
Mr. Mayor, yes. So this is just the public meeting portion for this particular bylaw. Staff will prepare a report taking into consideration the comments made, and that report will be before council in January. And at that time, we anticipate that council will make a decision on the bylaw then.
Very good. Thank you. All right, moving on then to item 8. This is correspondence from Enbridge and from the town of Caledon. Can we have a motion to receive this correspondence, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? Would any councillors like to ask a question or comment on this? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, I'm just wondering what is the feeling of the council to submit for the public hearing opposition to the rate increase because Orangeville falls within the Enbridge gas distribution rate, and I think as a way of supporting multiple Enbridge gas of our citizens that in town that would be getting a bill from Enbridge, I think that, you know, maybe we could be one voice for our whole community and to voice opposition against the rate increase as an undue hardship to our constituents.
I'm reading it right now, Councillor Sherwood. It's $1.11 annual increase.
Is that annual? That's what I was trying to figure out.
Annual. So, you know.
That is annual for sure, right?
Well, that's the way I'm reading it. In a couple of the areas, the Union South it was actually reduced.
Yeah, I know it's stating annual, but I worried about are they not talking about an actual rate, an individual rate that they charge?
They're recovering costs related to 5 projects, capital projects, and spreading that out amongst their constituents, whatever you want to call it, their customers.
Right.
$1.11 annually. So
okay, well, I could forego my McDonald's coffee for a day, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, these big corporations, I guess, you know, they have to recover some money over time. But if you want to put a motion out there for a letter in opposition, and council wants to vote in that way, then so be it.
No, now that I've got clarification, like I did see annual, don't get me wrong. I wasn't, I was just wanting to make sure that it wasn't going to be a hardship, but like I say, $1.11 should be tolerable.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
I just wanted to bring forward, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to bring forward, and I always think it's benevolent whenever we try and fight these things. And I think we should be critical thinkers and think through whether or not we should do this sort of thing. But just as a warning to everybody on council, if you're paying attention to inflation, and in my day job, I'm certainly well aware of commodities and what's happening. Like the next period of time here is going to be deeply shocking to people in terms of cost of living. And if you need big groceries in January, I would suggest that you load up in December, because it'll be expensive for people. It's we're going to have some hardships for sure. So Enbridge, oil, all those types of things are going to be input costs that consumers are going to be taking on the chin, which is difficult at best. We all know what that's going to mean, right? But anyway, we should think through whether or not we want to, if we can make a difference, we should. I just think at this point it's going to be awfully difficult for us to make a difference, to change that trajectory.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I have one question. I wonder if Ms. McKinney could weigh in on the Caledon 311. Is that something that we're working on, Ms. McKinney? And if so, where are we with respect to 311?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we did bring forward 311. We went through a similar process. Jason, Mr. Hall worked directly with the telcos and with our local municipalities to seek approval. And we're looking at turning on that functionality next year, first in sort of a pilot mode in the background and make sure that everything's running smoothly, and then proceeding to full implementation. Excellent.
Thank you very much for that update. All right, councillors, we had a motion to receive these 2 pieces of correspondence. Any further comment?
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify for the public, it also gives the support to Caledon.
Yes. Okay. Yes, and the support to Caledon on the implementation of their 311 service. Very good. So with that motion amendment, all in favor? Thank you, councillors. All right, and we're moving on to our confirmatory bylaw for tonight's meeting, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of Town of Waterford at its council and public meeting held on November 15th, 2021. May I have a motion, please, on that? Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? And a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Taylor, Councillor Andrews, all in favor? Thank you, folks. All the best.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
And everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice time.